أشرقت نفسي بنور من فؤادي حينما رددت
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome everyone to this important webinar on the topic of supporting students' spiritual growth at home and school. My name is Iman Al-Batniji. I'm the principal of the Maritime Muslim Academy in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and I will be your moderator for the day. This webinar is hosted by the Islamic School Association of Canada and organized in collaboration with a remarkable group of partner organizations, Nectar Foundation, Sound Vision Canada, and Ruh Care. First of all, please allow me to start by briefly introducing ISAC and the work they do. ISAC aspires to promote, advance, and develop Islamic schools across Canada by grounding their efforts in current emerging research on Islamic education. Their vision is centered on fostering God-centered education inspired by Islamic worldview. They share the mission of Islamic schools across Canada to help nurture the next generation of Muslim students as model Canadian citizens, contributing meaningfully to both our community and the global Ummah. With a team of educational experts, ISAC has been dedicated to building networks between Islamic schools and organizations across Canada. They share resources, offer educational conferences, retreats, professional development workshops, and create guides designed to strengthen Islamic pedagogy and teaching practices rooted in faith. Additionally, ISAC supports Islamic school communities across Canada in offering webinars like this one on topics of critical importance. Tonight, we are honored to partner with incredible organizations, including Nectar Education, Sound Vision Canada, and Ruh Care, to address the topic of supporting students on spiritual growth at schools and at home. To understand more about our partners, we are pleased to have with us a representative from each organization who will take the time to shortly give an overview of the work they do. I would like first to start by welcoming Sister Hiba Fahmi from Sound Vision Canada. And Sister Hiba, please, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you, Sister Iman, and the entire ISAC team for organizing this very important webinar. We are delighted and honored to serve as a partnering organization for this event. My name is Hiba Fahmi, and I'm the Manager of Operations at Sound Vision Canada. Sound Vision Canada is a registered charity working to equip, enhance, and energize the Muslim community. How? By delivering educational programs, training opportunities, and skill-building resources. We strive to elevate the standards of quality in our Muslim organizations and institutions, such as our Islamic schools. We are a very small team at Sound Vision Canada, but we are driven to create a stronger Muslim community for the sake of future generations, ultimately to please our Creator. Sound Vision Canada offers in-person training events as well as online workshops. Alhamdulillah, we also offer opportunities to earn certifications in specialized areas of learning, such as how to teach Islamic studies effectively to every age level. Sound Vision Canada's teacher training events include an array of relevant topics delivered in an interactive style with practical activities and opportunities for peer learning. Our training programs are led by experts in the fields of education and child development with years of experience working with Muslim children and youth. We emphasize practical strategies teachers can implement in their classrooms, all within the context of an Islamic framework. We're available to collaborate with Islamic schools to customize training programs according to the needs for teacher professional development. In addition, Sound Vision Canada has conducted a variety of virtual workshops and webinars that remain accessible through recordings and other resources. Some topics include discovering Palestine in the classroom, exploring Black Muslim history, among many others. Please feel free to reach out to info@soundvisioncanada.org for more information. Jazakumullah khair. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Thank you so much, Sister Hiba. And I would like right now to welcome Sister Aisha from Ruh Care. Please, Sister Aisha, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Aisha, and alhamdulillah, I'm the program manager at Ruh Care. It is an honor to join you today at this insightful webinar organized by ISAC. Jazakallah khairan. Today, we are gathered to delve into a very, very crucial and timely topic on the topic of spiritual readiness, especially in time for Ramadan. At ISAC, there's a strong commitment to breaking out of working in silos and instead fostering collaboration among many of the thriving Islamic organizations, alhamdulillah. And this is all about strengthening our community by pooling our resources and expertise to really uplift each other. And at Ruh Care, we resonate deeply with this mission as we aim to really work to bridge the professional development and personal and spiritual growth through the innovative care that we all do, alhamdulillah. On that note, Ruh Care is an online therapy platform where our licensed team of dedicated Muslim mental health professionals are committed to providing Islamically aligned and culturally responsive mental health care. Our mission is rooted in the understanding that mental wellness is a crucial part of our holistic health, which our faith deeply, deeply, deeply values. We are guided by principles of empathy, confidentiality, and professional excellence, ensuring that our services honor the dignity and beliefs of every single individual we serve. Spiritual readiness is not just about individual enrichment, it's a communal aspiration that enhances our collective resilience and understanding. And in today's very complex and very, very heavy world, navigating our spiritual journeys can be challenging without the proper guidance. And this is why at Ruh, we really emphasize the importance of professional support from qualified therapists and counselors. Our experts work to aid in better understanding ourselves and our relationships with the world around us, and they equip us with the right tools to assess our mental, psychological, and spiritual well-being accurately, allowing us and ensuring that we are ready to face the challenges of today and tomorrow, not just with clarity, but most importantly, also with faith. Alhamdulillah. As we continue to explore this theme of spiritual readiness in preparation for Ramadan, let us commit to a journey of continuous learning and cooperation. And alhamdulillah, together with ISAC's visionary direction and the collective efforts of various Islamic organizations, we can achieve a much more enlightened and cohesive community, which I'm sure we're all really, really working towards. Let's cherish and utilize these moments of learning and connection and help pave the way for a series of these enriching webinars that will not only educate, but also inspire the policy development and professional growth across our communities. Thank you so, so much for the opportunity to connect, and I look forward to today's enriching discussions. And I will drop a quick link in the chat, inshallah, regarding Ruh Care for anyone that is interested in learning a little bit more. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Thank you so much, Sister Aisha, and Jazakumullah khair. May Allah bless you and bless your efforts. And our main speaker for the evening will also be speaking about Nectar Education. So please allow me first to provide an introduction of our webinar for this evening, and also and some information about our speaker, and then I will pass on the mic for them. For tonight's webinar, it's starting for this evening, and it features the presentation from Dr. Fatwa Al-Ashi about the topic of spiritual development. With Ramadan only a few days away, and Ramadan Mubarak to you all, this webinar will equip us all with an insight on prophetic principles for fostering students' spiritual growth, exploring contemporary research on spiritual development in children and youth and learning, how to integrate key curricular elements that embrace Islamic engagement in schools. We would like to thank you all for coming here and presenting for this evening, and for providing these areas of interest. Our panelists we're looking at these areas, and we will answer the questions later, inshallah, at the end of the session. Throughout the webinar, please, we would like to ask you to use the Zoom question and answer section in order to put your questions, and it will be answered towards the end, inshallah. A small introduction about our guest speaker, Sister Fatwa Al-Ashi. I'm honored to introduce her and give you some information about her. Dr. Fatwa Al-Ashi is a child development expert and the founder of Nectar Education. She has served as an assistant professor of developmental psychology, teaching courses on educational psychology, learning through play, and child development. Her research focuses on development of critical thinking in children, and she has published several peer-reviewed articles on this field. Dr. Lashi has also led the teacher training modules on nurturing higher educational thinking skills, cultivating spiritual development, and emphasizing creativity and critical thinking. Her passion for fostering optimal and equitable learning environment for all children led her to establish Nectar Education. So I would like to welcome Sister Fadwa, and the ground is yours. Jazakumullah khair.
Jazakallah khairan, Sister Iman, for the wonderful introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I always feel, subhanAllah, I always feel so blessed to be part of a community of educators and parents and leaders that are investing their time so that they can learn more about how we can support our children, the future generation. As Sister Iman had mentioned, I am the founder of Nectar Education. I'd like to tell you a little bit more about Nectar Education, what it is, before we jump into our topic for today. So what motivated me to find Nectar Education or establish it is really this need to advance quality learning for everyone, for all children. There's always has been a gap between what research says and how children learn best, and then what we actually see in the classroom. So Nectar Education as a nonprofit works to bridge between what research recommends and then what's actually happening in the classrooms, while at the same time really envisioning our role as human beings on this earth, and that is to empower our children to become khulafa that are making positive contributions to their society. So we do this in several ways. There's 3 different areas that we target. We do it directly through the children, with children, through our learning programs. So these are learning programs that we've run in the past, including leadership halaqas, STEM programs, Arabic programs, or we also create community partnerships where we partner with community organizations such as Sound Vision, ISAC, for instance, or even Islamic Relief Canada, or even non-Muslim organizations such as public libraries or public parks. And we create programs through these community partnerships. And then finally, we also do consulting and training directly with schools as well. So we provide customized training to schools, even provide them with curriculum necessities if that's something that they're interested in looking for. But basically, it's all collected under the umbrella of elevating quality learning for all. And we do that all through our evidence-based research, making sure that we're focusing on the whole child, ensuring that teachers are also fostering positive learning communities, and that the children are realizing that their work is having a real world impact. So here's a glimpse of a little of the work that we've done in the past. Some things that we've done directly with children. You can see it with our community organizations on the left, and then moving towards the right is where we see some of our Arabic programs, leadership halaqas, and then finally some of our leadership programs that we've also offered. Some of our upcoming work that you can look up for is we're going to be focusing on offering training program on teaching and learning Arabic as a second language, if that's something that teachers or even parents are looking to learn more about, as well as learning more about community-based learning, what that means, as well as providing education training programs, in addition to the children programs that we offer. So if you'd like to stay up to date with the latest news and events with Nectar Education, you can feel free to scan the QR code. It will just simply ask you for your name and email, and you'll be added to our mailing list. You can also check us out in the socials, Instagram or Facebook at Nectar Education, or email us at info@nectareducation.ca. So with that said, I'd like to get started with our webinar today. And kind of it's kind of whenever I organize trainings or webinars of some sort, I really like to have some sort of engagement and interaction. And I know this is a webinar style, and there's a large number that have joined us today. But I would still like to encourage you guys to interact, even if it's through the chat, raising your hand, and then we can unmute you, whatever way, whatever method you choose, whether it's through the chat or by raising your hand to be unmuted. We'd love to hear from you because education is a bi-directional process. I'm sharing information with you guys, but I'd also love to hear back from you as well. So I encourage you to share your thoughts as I go on. So with that said, I'd like to get started with an image. And I'd like you to take a close look at each of these images. They're actually a picture of the same thing, pretty much the same angle at the same place, same location. Each picture was taken at a different time. But I'd like for you to share with me, again, either through the chat or if you'd like to raise your hand, and unmute yourself. What are some of the things that you notice, or what do you wonder or feel about what you're seeing in the images? And at the moderators, I'm unable to see if anybody has raised their hand. So if anybody raised their hand, or if there is any comments in the chats, you can let me
Sister
know.
Asma raised her hand, please.
Yeah. Okay. I see two participants raised their hands. Now I can see that. So,
Yeah, I noticed
Yeah.
that there's like a bridge in the very first picture. That's what it looks like a little walkway.
Oh, okay. Like right here. I don't know if you guys
Yeah.
can you guys see my mouse pointing?
Yeah, it looks
Okay.
like it looks like a
Yes.
walkway. But
Yeah,
then it's
okay.
much narrower, or like it's disappeared after that.
Oh, over here. It's gotten
Yes,
smaller. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I didn't notice that. I think I have a reason for why that might be. Okay, thank you. Is it Esma that just shared with us?
it's been.
Okay, Jazakallah khairan. Are there any other comments in the chat, or anybody else who would like to
We have Faiz, Sir Faiz who raised his hand. Please go ahead.
Okay, I already went. And the chat's actually disabled.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I can't see anybody on the chat as well.
Can you hear me?
I can
Yes,
hear.
go ahead.
Yes. This is Sister Aisha Tosin. I'm a teacher at Manara Academy. I just wanted to show you tell you my observations. So I did notice that there's a minaret in the first picture.
Yes.
Right. And the second, third picture, of course, it's not there. So it looks like they have removed it.
Okay. Yes, I wondered about that too. I'm like, I wonder who put that there? Why is it there? And then it's not here in the later pictures. Does anybody wonder what this, it's a minbud, obviously, what this minbud is? Where is it located? Maybe why is it significant? Why are there pictures of it? Aisha?
It looks like somebody who is holy has been there.
Okay.
It could be maybe the mosque of the Prophet. That's what I'm guessing, right? Somebody holy. Usually it will be closed off to public and maybe used on special occasions. What else do I say?
And I'm assuming that you think that it's closed off to public because of this glass over here, this red tape or this.
I just noticed it now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I thought there was just tape across saying like maybe you can't enter, but yes, now I see.
There's like red tape or like glass that's across from it. Yes. Okay, Jazakallah khairan for your comments and additions. I appreciate your participation. So this minbar is special because actually it is in Masjid al-Aqsa. And what we see here is the different phases of the minbar. The little dome, or the little I'm not sure what they call it, but the one that the reason that it's in this earlier picture was because it was placed by one of the Khalifas in the past. And then when that dynasty and empire had fallen, it was removed to signify that that Khalifa was no longer in power. And so that's why we don't see it in this picture, which is in the 1930s. And then this is another picture, which was taken in the early 2000s, or mid to early 2000s, early to mid 2000s. And what's so significant about this minbar is actually it was commissioned by Nuruddin Zingi to be placed in Al-Aqsa Mosque 20 years before Salah ad-Din had conquered Jerusalem. So 20 years before Salah ad-Din even had the plan set out to conquer Jerusalem, the Crusaders were still in Al-Aqsa Mosque. Nuruddin put the plan and commissioned the workers in Syria, the carpenters in Syria, to create this minbar. Reading this fact made me realize that as leaders and as educators, it's very important for us to always think ahead and really set the framework or the pathway for what we're working towards. Nuruddin Zingi did not live long enough to see this actualization and to actually see his minbar being placed in Masjid al-Aqsa, but it eventually was set there. And we can't mention this minbar or Nuruddin's work or even Salah ad-Din's work without mentioning Nuruddin's emphasis on not only his leadership, but his investment in establishing and commissioning madrasas throughout the region. In fact, during Nuruddin's time, his establishment of madrasas and ensuring that the Muslim population becomes more informed about their faith and their deen and become united was one of his pivotal characteristics and things that issues that really led and paved the road for Salah ad-Din. So the reason that before I move forward, I just want to mention, one of the earlier participants had mentioned that she noticed that the bridge looked smaller. The reason that we see this looking a little, this last picture is actually a replica of the original Nuruddin minbar. Unfortunately, in the 60s, a Christian Zionist fanatic had burned the original down, but it was replicated by Jordanian carpenters, and perhaps that's why there's some restructuring differences between the pictures because of a fire that ensued in Al-Aqsa Mosque. But it sets us to think as educators and leaders is what is our minbar goal? When we're thinking about spirituality and spiritual development and support, what is the end goal that we're hoping to see in our students, in our children? And really thinking that, if you're teaching today a child who's, for instance, in grade 1, in just 5 years, that child is going to be a grade 6 student. And we all know the huge difference between grade 1 and grade 6 in terms of establishing that student's personality, his confidence and identity in his deen. And so what happens is that usually as educators, we say, oh, I've just been working in the profession for 5 years or 6 years. And we see that number as so insignificant. But in fact, those years are so powerful in terms of the contribution it's making in our children's lives. So I'd like you to reflect on what is your minbar goal? This is not something that you need to share verbally out in as in this webinar. But I'd really like to invite you to take a few minutes to think about when we're thinking about supporting students' spiritual growth at school and home. Why are we doing that? So that they Is it so that they can develop resilience and face challenges, that they might experience in their daily life? Is it because we want them to be leaders that contribute positively to the Muslim and non-Muslim society? What is it that you are setting a plan for, whether it's 5 years from now, 10 years from now, or 20 years from now? So once you have reflected on that and really thought deeply about what is it that you really want to see in your children and students, we can go on to talk about the steps towards achieving that. But before I talk about the strategies and the Quranic principles and prophetic principles that can help you really see that to light, I'd like to talk about some of the contemporary research on spiritual development. So there isn't much empirical data and empirical research from an Islamic perspective, but some Western literature does give us some insight into spiritual development. And one of the first, so I'll first talk about that. And one of the first things that they do is first distinguish between what is the difference between religious versus spiritual development. So the title of our talk today is Supporting the Spiritual Growth of Our Students. And the reason that we said spiritual growth versus religious growth is because religious growth is focused more on people's application of the religious rites and religious practices. So religious development would be related to how can we support children, sticking to their prayers, reading Quran, doing all the worship. This is what the religious development focuses on, whereas spiritual development focuses on children's actual development of understanding that there's a God, understanding that Islam, for instance, is the true religion, understanding that this is the religion that I identify with, and really understanding or connecting with the religion at a spiritual level. So for the rest of the talk today, I'll be focusing on the spiritual development, because as you will see, this is where most of us struggle. And you will also see why it's actually more important to set that foundation first before we move on to the more religious aspects. So there's actually three there isn't a single theory that would describe, okay, how do children develop spiritually? There's three areas of research that kind of give their own description of, or explanation for how they think children develop their spirituality. So in the first group of researchers, they're focusing on how children feel towards God, and that children and students and humans in general develop a feeling for God based on their early experiences and attachment with their parents or caregivers. So if I've had positive early experiences, my mother has always developed this positive attachment between me and herself, then I will extend that understanding of relationship and positive early experiences with my understanding of who God is and how I feel towards him. And so it's highly dependent on the relationships that we experience early on. With the cognitive researchers, they focus on, okay, well, how do children begin to think about God? What is their understanding of God's powers, of God's existence? And with these researchers, they see children's understanding of God just as any other cognitive skill. So the same way we think about concrete versus abstract topics such as justice or freedom, God falls along the same line. So children think of God in terms of more concrete ways, thinking of him as more human-like. And then as they get older and they're also influenced by some of the teachings from their family, they start thinking about God in more abstract ways. But what they notice is that really because there is some sort of influence from what they hear and how they evaluate the information that's being passed around them from families and the society, that really their thinking is not that different than adults. In fact, there's some research that shows that children as young as 4 years old are able to distinguish that God is very different than humans and does not share the same characteristics. So their thinking about God is very similar to how adults think about God. And then the final group of researchers, which we call this the relational developmental, and they're focusing on how children learn about God. So how is it that children become to understand that God is omnipotent, that God is perhaps, depending on which religion the children come from, what he looks like, what we can see, what we can't see, what we do know and what we don't know about God. This is what these researchers are interested in. How do children develop this understanding? And basically this, with these researchers, the idea is that it's just a complete interaction between biological and social systems. And so the idea is that there's some evolutionary, according to these researchers, there's some evolutionary basis for humans to believe in a God or in a divine creator. But then at the same time, it's these social systems or our societies that shape how we learn about this divine creator. So you can see that each group of researchers have their own interpretation of how children learn spiritually, and we'll see what does our religion say. And you guys might already have some idea of which of these theories you lean more towards. You may feel like you're closer to the relational developmental point of view, less so towards the psychoanalytic, or less so towards the cognitive, or maybe it's just a mix of all three. But we'll learn and talk about how this relates again back to our original point of how's this going to help us create or support children's spiritual development. But if there's one thing that they all agree on, it's that it takes a village to raise a religious or spiritual child, and that the family is the first village. So with the psychoanalytic, the early experiences, with the cognitive, the way that the children think about God, and with the relational developmental, they all seem to circulate around the idea that the family plays and society plays a very large role in children's understanding of God and of spirituality. And so based on that, there's massive amounts of research that talk about, well, what are the impacts of that first village of the family on children's religiosity and spirituality. So one research study found that children and youth who engaged in open communication about religion started seeing religion as more important to their lives, and their belief in God was stronger. So with open youth-centered communication, this is not the typical Islamic studies Sunday classes. This is not the child comes to class, you give a lesson and they leave. That's not an open youth-centered communication. Open youth-centered communication is more of a dialogue that goes on, discussion that goes on between the adult and the child, where the child is asking curious questions about their religion, and then the adult provides the necessary answers and guidance in terms of thinking. So it's more youth-centered, youth-led, and these behaviors have been linked to children recognize the importance of their religion and their belief in God. In addition to warm and supportive relationships with religious parents, has also enhanced the religious and spiritual development of U.S. adolescents and even Indonesian Muslims. So in these two different research studies, they found that it's not only about what we're telling them, the practices that we continuously try to remind them and establish habits for. It's also about what sort of relationships and atmosphere are we creating in the home or in the classroom that would allow children to really develop these strong connections with their spirituality and with their religion. And then finally, and this is one thing that I found really interesting, was specifically with adolescent spirituality. They found that it was predicted by the mother's spiritual support and dialogue, but the father's general care. So it seemed like the mother's role and her emphasis in really providing that spiritual support, whether it's taking them to the masjid or the church or whatever it may be, or making sure that at school, if they go to a public school, that they have a place to pray, or that during Ramadan they have a place to sit aside during nutrition breaks, or even if it is just simply bringing a prayer mat and making sure that the child is remembering his prayers. These are all things that the mother's role plays a large role in, versus the father, where he's giving this general care about just sharing the importance of really supporting the child in him or her applying the practices of their religion. And then finally, even having friends who are engaged in religious discussions has also been linked to adolescent spirituality. So from this research, we find that, dialogue, positive relationships, and your social circle, whether it's within your home or even outside your home, all play a role in building that village that we're talking about. But I've recently been really being cognizant about really going back to our own literature as Muslims, because we have to recognize that while the Western research is useful, we need to find something that is specific to our work, but not only that we already know works from the hadith and from the Quran that has given us these answers anyways. So it's really an intellectual decolonization of the research that we're often so dependent on, and really starting to look back and consider our own literature, our own Islamic literature, and how that can help us really establish strong, a strong ummah, a strong generation that leads to victories, as we've talked about with Salah ad-Din in the beginning. So that brings me to talking about the Quranic and prophetic principles for supporting spiritual development. And alhamdulillah, in Islam, it's actually pretty simple. In the Quran, it tells us that Allah has already created every human being with an innate desire to connect with their creator. And we know that during our creation, Allah had asked each of us that, am I your Lord? And we all witnessed and agreed that he testified that he is our Lord. So this is evidence in our own Quranic, Quranic, literature that shows that there is no disagreement about or difficulty in establishing children's understanding of God, because they're already born with this already instilled in them. But what happens is that we see that the society is what sort of could change that, right? So many of you might have heard of the hadith where every child is born with a true faith of Islam, to worship none but Allah alone, and his parents convert him to either Judaism, Christianity, or Magianism. So really our job as educators, as Muslim educators and parents, is really just to maintain that fitrah. And the literature, the Islamic literature in this area, specifically to تربية الطفل and raising the Muslim child, focuses on that aqidah, or our understanding of God, is dependent on this fitra that's already within us. So I'd like you to kind of look at these different evidences. This is just a very, very short, there's obviously a plethora of evidence, but these are the three that I've chose to display here today. And I'd like you guys to share with me what is it that you notice is shared between all of these pieces of evidence. So in the first one, it's the first piece of advice that Luqman said to his son, and that is لا تشرك بالله يا بني لا تشرك بالله إن الشرك لظلم عظيم. So, oh my dear son, never associate anything with Allah in worship, because it is truly the worst of all wrongs. In the second piece of evidence is a hadith in Tirmidhi, but it is sahih, where maybe some of you have heard of it. Ya ghulam inni a'allimuka kalimat. So the translation of that is, young man, I will teach you some words. This is the Prophet speaking to a young Sahabi, where he says, be mindful of God and he will take care of you. Be mindful of him and you shall find him at your side. If you ask of God. If you need to help, seek it from God. And the last piece of evidence is actually not a saying of the Prophet, but of one of the Sahaba, and it was reported by Ibn Majah and reported as Hasan. And the Sahaba was describing that when they were young around the Prophet, he would teach us faith before the Quran. Then he would teach us the Quran, and it would increase us in faith. And so he was talking about how now, at that time, that people are being taught Quran before faith. So I'd like to hear your thoughts about these three pieces of evidence, and what do you think that tells us about supporting spiritual development? So again, you can raise your hand to be unmuted, or you can share that in the chat. So Iram?
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Yes, what I perceive from what is in front of me is like it starts very young.
Okay, very
Yeah,
good.
yeah. So like we need not to wait. Like I have been in the profession for some time, and sometime I see that parents wait that, oh, let him grow up and then we will teach him. But for me, it starts like, the first village is the home and the first teacher will be the mother. And it starts from that time. And yeah, you can teach kids to read Quran, but faith is more like when they have faith, they will love reading Quran. Otherwise, they will read Quran as like a book, they are reading.
Yeah, so subhanAllah, I actually didn't I completely agree with you in terms of the establishing the faith foundations early on. But when I put this here, I had something else in mind, but I really appreciate your insight in that this is actually, all of these examples are focusing on, like, the children are young here. I mean, we don't know exactly how young Luqman's son is, but it's presumed that he must be young, and then the same thing with the other two pieces of evidence. So Jazakallah khairan for that for that insight. Yeah. So what I got from this evidence was the emphasis on really connecting our children with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's something that is usually lacked in our community, right? Or even in our Islamic schools, Islamic studies curriculum. It's really focused on just sharing information, sharing prophet stories, memorizing the Quran, knowing the 5 pillars of Islam, the 5 pillars of Iman. And there isn't as much emphasis, especially early on, as the brother said, focusing on how we can establish that early on is really focusing on children really understanding who's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and really building that connection with their creator. So I'm going to talk about, inshallah, these 5 principles, but I would like to take a quick, just 5-minute break for us to pray Maghrib, because I know that Aisha will be, we started after Adhan al-Maghrib, and Aisha will be coming in soon. So I'm just going to turn off my camera and put myself on mute as well, and I'll get started, inshallah, after 5 minutes for us to continue talking about the prophetic principles. Hey, assalamu alaikum, everyone. I hope everyone is back. For the sake of time, I'm going to continue from where we left off, inshallah, so we can get all the benefit of the time that is remaining, inshallah. So we left off on talking about the importance of really connecting our children, or building that faith foundation early on, and really focusing on building our children's iman before we go on to moving to the religious aspects, right? Such as the Quran and prayer and things like that. Now, that does not mean that we don't engage in those practices, but the idea is, what can we do to really help strengthen those faith foundations early on? So there are 5 principles, and we will start with Tawheed, and this is the simplest of them. Yet, how often, I'd like you, as I'm presenting each of these principles, to ask yourself, how often am I doing this, or providing children or students opportunities to engage in each of these principles? So how often in the early years, for instance, are we teaching kids from 0 to 5 the Shahada, or even up to grade 1? How often do these students repeat the Shahada or really understand what it means when we say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah? What does that mean? And how does that make us feel inside? How does that apply with our daily life? And what does it mean to say Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah? Really, just not only having students repeat these, repeat the kalimat al-tawheed, but at the same time for them to be able to really understand and feel what it means. And this could be from also repeating Surah Al-Ikhlas and understanding the meaning of it. Many people might assume that children, even preschool age, are too young to understand this. But like I said, we're going back to the fitrah that they already have. And some of the Islamic literature shows that even our previous, previous mashayikh would provide evidence of children as young as 3 years old being taught to repeat things like, for instance, Allah ma'i, Allah nadiri, Allah shahidi. So Allah is with me, Allah is watching me, Allah is my witness. And by simply having children engage in this repetition, and while at the same time understanding what it means and really feeling it, we are helping set that foundation for children to always have Allah on the top of their mind and always turning to Him whenever they're facing challenges. So it all starts with with the Tawheed, really focusing on how we can emphasize that in their daily lives. The second principle is really developing that love for Allah. We talked about that through the Tawheed. You'll see that a lot of these principles are not obviously mutually exclusive. There's a lot of overlap between them. But when we talk about the love for Allah, we're talking about understanding Him through His names and attributes and really building emotional connections with those names. So, for instance, if you're out on a walk, or even if you're watching a nature video. The other day we were watching a nature video and we saw the orcas and how they were hunting. There's so much learning that can go on in those situations, right? But why don't we also take the opportunity to take awe in Allah's creations, and really building that emotional connection with what they're seeing and what they know about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you can say, MashaAllah, look how, have you ever noticed the orca, how it's like white on the top, and then their bellies are always, or I'm sorry, black on the top, and their bellies are always white. Look at the contrast between the white and the black, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose those colors. They're so simple, black and white, but the way that it looks on the orca is just so majestic. So it's just a normal video, but you're always sort of reminding your children or the students in your classroom of how Allah relates to what they're learning. So it's not something that's just limited to Islamic studies class or just limited to Sunday school for your children if they're at home. This is something that we can include in our everyday life. And the final thing is also recognizing that through our love and connection with Allah, it really comes back to that hadith that the second piece of evidence that I had mentioned earlier before the break, is that we want children that when they're facing any difficulty in life, to really know that Allah is always going to be there for them. They're facing issues at work. They're feeling nervous at school. Any of the challenges that they may be presented with, they need to know that they can always turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for dua, and also through his dhikr. And what better way to do that than in this month of Ramadan? Many times we see Ramadan as about the crescent and stars, and all of the books that we see are related to seeing the sighting of the moon. And that is a sunnah, and it should be practiced. But sometimes we lose light of the purpose of Ramadan, and focus on just the fasting aspect of it, and the crescent and the stars and the lanterns, where in fact Ramadan is the month of the Quran. And what better way to connect with our Creator but through the Quran? And so it's really important for us to think about how can we incorporate more of these reminders throughout our day, so that we can create that strong connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Simultaneously, or after that, we also need to talk about how often are we helping our children and students really develop a love for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Ahlul Bayt and his Sahaba. One of the Sahaba had asked the Prophet about when is the Day of Judgment. So the Prophet had asked him, well, what have you prepared for it? And the Sahaba had replied that I have not prepared anything, but I love, but what I do know is that I love prophets. I love the Prophet. I love you, or I love the Prophet. And so the Prophet had replied to him and told him, Al-mar'u ma'man ahab. You will be with whom you love. So what better connection can we have, in addition to their connection with their Creator, but to the connection to the most perfect human that has ever been sent to us on this earth. He is the best model for our children to follow. Forget the self-help books that are out there. Those are useful sometimes, but what better model to follow than our own Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? whether it's through memorizing and studying his ahadith, or just understanding the seerah. These are all ways that we can help our children develop a love for him. So, for instance, whenever we're in the school or at home, are we saying the dua before we start our lunch, for instance? Are we, whenever we go to the washroom or enter the masjid, are we establishing the sunan that have been established by the Prophet in that we can learn about all in the hadith? These are all ways that we can sort of incorporate our connection and love with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam through understanding his hadith and his seerah. And then we also need to talk about the love for the Quran. And so what we usually see is it's actually kind of twisted upside down in our Islamic institutions, educational institutions, is that we see the Quran coming first before Allah, before the Prophet. But again, like I want to point out that I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that, but it's also important that we really focus on those earlier points discussed. But even when we're introducing the Quran, it should be introduced as the true guidebook. So whenever there's a question that we don't know, some challenges that we're facing in life, something interesting that happened, we can always turn back to the Quran and find examples of it and reflect on the ayat, just as the Prophet and his Sahaba used to do that. And really engage in tadabbur. And these things can be done even with the younger age group. So sometimes when we say tadabbur, we think, oh, okay, this is only for like teenagers and young adults. But even with children as young as 4 or 5, they can engage in tadabbur. So for example, even when we say قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ, and we explain the meaning of the ayah to them and say that there is only one God, we can invite the child, well, what do you think, what do you think only one God? Why is there only one God? And really engage in the meaning of those words and guiding their thinking so that we could be thankful or develop that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then finally, taking advantage of the analogies and the stories that are in the Quran. The Quran is filled with beautiful analogies and stories that can that children can learn from in their own lives. And these are all ways that we can also use as examples when we're teaching our children. And I'll show you guys examples of that later on. But as a quick example, for instance, when we're talking about the sadaqah and the benefits of the sadaqah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran gives this example of the wheat and how each wheat has the benefit of sadaqah is beyond the amount that you give, and so it's important to use these analogies when we're also teaching these concepts to our children and students. Or even the example of asking when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to the non-believers worshiping people who can't even create a fly. And, maybe, you can always bring the idea of, okay, what does a fly look like? Or what are the, what does, what are the different parts of a fly? And really studying, making perhaps like a science unit about flies, and then really embedding that with the understanding of even a fly is something that somebody can't even create or even take back from what the fly had sipped. So these are all examples, and it's basically a curriculum that's ready out there for you, and you just need to use those to implement in the classroom or at home. And then the final principle is the steadfastness in faith. And these are through the examples from the Sirah and other prophet stories. So talk about the story of Bilal ibn Rabah, and how he was steadfast despite the torture that he was going through. Or Prophet Ayub and his patience, and really talk about the feelings and what it must have been like to be in his shoes. Or even saying, telling them, sharing the story of Prophet Musa, not just for the sake of sharing the story of what Prophet Musa went through, but to really let children understand the importance of facing a bully or facing a pharaoh, and really being able to stand your ground and really take confidence and pride in your religion, and understanding that Allah is always going to be there on your side if you really put your true trust in him. Or even talking about the boys and the cave, those who, they did not want to, they did not want to stay in a city that was full of tyrants and full of disbelievers. And so with their faith and with Allah's help, they were able to become a perfect example for us even today. And not only through these examples and other stories, but really thinking about how they can apply these stories in their own real lives. So we're not only sharing these stories, but really thinking about how we can make them feel the value of the information that we are sharing to them. So now that we've talked about these prophetic principles, so understanding how is it that we can establish Tawheed in their hearts, really build on this love to Allah and His Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, as well as building a connection with the Quran and steadfastness in His faith. We talked about some of the examples that you can use in your home or in the classroom, but I want to talk about some additional strategies that you can use that would create an even more engaging Islamic curriculum, and that would allow for a deep, lifelong connection with their faith. So here's an example of some strategies or activities that are usually common in the Ramadan preparations, whether it's a craft with Ramadan Mubarak sign or decor, maybe it's a Ramadan advent calendar, maybe it's some fun activity sheets or books, coloring your own masjid or understanding the phases of the moon, designing your own prayer mat, or maybe it's reading some books about Ramadan, or even listening to some online lectures. These are all examples of some typical Ramadan activities, in addition to even the Ramadan trackers, where track how many fasts you've completed, or how many juzu's you've read, or how much sadaqah you've given. These are all beautiful examples of ways that we can support children's spiritual development through these different activities. But I'd like to hear from you guys specifically. What is it that perhaps you think may not work with these activities in terms of supporting the spiritual development? So I can just quickly hear from one person if they'd like to share. Is there a way that you feel like this may not work in supporting the spiritual development based on what we've talked about?
Yeah, these are all things that we give them. It's not something that's necessarily child-led, like you talked about. It's something it doesn't come from them, and they might not take ownership if it's just something. It might just be another busy thing,
Yes, I love it. Yes, it's another busy thing. Yes, it's busy work. And I'm not saying this is not to criticize the efforts of all of these. We all benefit from each of these things, especially like the online, the online lectures. This is not something that I haven't done. I still do. But the idea is, how can we make learning more engaging and deeper? We don't want children just to be given the information. Education is not just about passing information. Sadly, that is what we see in many of these Islamic institutions. Actually, not just Islamic institutions, even public schools, we see that, where you know, education is struggling to step out of this idea of, okay, I'm the teacher passing you information, or I'm the mother passing you information. We need to step out of that and really think about education is about setting values. And so we need children to really feel what they're learning. And so how can we make them feel what they're learning and really take it in? That's through the student-led, part of that could be through student-led instruction, but I'm going to talk about 4 specific strategies that we can implement today in our homes or in our classrooms. So the first is either starting with a provocation or invitation, asking deep, meaningful questions is the second, third, making it meaningful, and then the last is letting the students collaborate. So starting with a provocation and invitation is an example of how I started the webinar today. I presented a photo for you guys, and I invited you guys to think, to wonder, and through that could lead to discussions or to the topic of interest. So what you see here is that I'm sparking your curiosity, I'm sparking your mind, rather than just coming in and telling you, okay, this is what we're going to be talking about, and just kind of like kind of filling your minds with, as if I'm like pouring in from a jug to a cup. And so these provocations could be anything. It could be a picture like I used. It could be a video. It could be a story that you read aloud, physical objects, a surprising fact, or even scientific explorations that you do, like scientific experiments that you somehow connect with an Islamic concept. So for instance, in the past with the scientific explorations, I've done the experiment where you put salt on a stretched balloon that's over a plate, and then you play loud, loud music. And so the sound waves from the speaker makes the salt on the plate move, even though nothing is touching it. So this is the idea of how sound waves are things that we can't see, but they are making changes in the environment. And so building on that experiment, I built on the idea of the whole, argument of if you can't see God, he doesn't exist is not a strong argument, because there are so many things around us that we can't see, but still have an impact on changes. Another example I've used with a provocation is something that I've presented with children in the past in our programs, where I presented this picture to them. Obviously, this was time during the segregation in the States. And this was a provocation or invitation that I presented to children that led to the discussion of really understanding the importance of Allah's Sharia, and that really no human is perfect in setting laws, and that the best way to set laws and to abide by the laws is by what Allah has decreed. So again, I didn't start off by talking about Allah's laws. I started off by presenting a provocation or invitation that piqued their interest, that piqued their curiosity, and led the discussion with the questions that the students had to the topic that I had identified. Another example that I had, you can see in this video, the kids have various items that they're playing with, and I had told them to build a blicket. Now, a blicket is actually a made-up word. It does not exist. But through this invitation, that led us to a discussion about, sometimes we don't know some things, and if we want to try to find an expert on blickets, we're not going to look for someone that has green eyes, that's very tall, and we're not going to choose our expert based on physical characteristics. If we need help building a blicket, we're going to ask somebody who is a blicket expert, so somebody who has studied all about blickets, who's very kind, that would give me his time to explain things. And so this leads to the discussion that when we're talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how he looks is not important. What matters is his attributes and his characteristics, knowing that Allah is that Allah is close, that he's always seeing, and then really talking about his attributes that way. The second strategy is asking deep, meaningful questions. Usually Islamic settings, we usually stop at what I call the level 1 or level 2, or not what I call, but what we refer here on this picture is the level 1 and level 2 questions. These are referring to Bloom's taxonomy. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but these are Bloom's taxonomy's levels. But the idea is that we want to think about more deeper questions whenever we're posing questions to children. And by doing that, we really help engage their thoughts in the information rather than them just taking it passively. So for instance, instead of just asking them, what are the 5 daily prayers in Islam, or where is the Kaaba, or why is the cat important? We can ask deeper level questions like, how do the 5 prayers really help shape us as Muslims and really build our personal discipline? Or how does zakah really help, build a community? Or how can I develop a community partnership plan that would encourage everyone in our Muslim community to really pay their zakah? So you can think about in this case, we're asking higher level questions. We're asking students to really evaluate, to critically think about the information that we're presenting them, to even create things that perhaps they can do on their own rather than just passively answering, comprehension questions. The third strategy is making things meaningful to students. So thinking about whenever I want to talk about Ramadan, for instance, or Isra al-Miraj, or any specific surah that students are memorizing, I want to make it clear from the beginning, what are the students working towards, or what are my children working towards? This could be maybe towards the end of them memorizing a surah, they're making a book, an illustrative book about the surah that they would share with people in their community. Maybe they're going to make a skit about a certain aspect in the seerah that they will present to real audience members, to families, or to people also in the community at the masjid. Maybe you can invite a guest speaker for the students, and they would have to ask them questions and interview the guest speaker. There are so many ways that we can try to connect Islamic concepts to real life situations to make it more meaningful to the students. So here's an example of something that I've done in my program. This is when we were asking, the students chose their own questions for this group. They chose, why does Allah ask us to worship him? And the way that they decided to solve the problem, which was, okay, well, how can we share this information with others? They made a skit of them answering this question. So they're the ones that developed the script, they recorded, they edited, and then I uploaded it on our Nectar Education YouTube page. And then the final thing is letting students collaborate. One thing that I've seen in my visits to schools, one of the most prevalent thing is that students are usually sitting in their own desks, filling out worksheets, or just listening to the teacher answering questions. There is a very little opportunity for students to actually work together. And so whenever you're thinking about this in your school or even at home, thinking about how you can create more communication between you and the students, and even the students working together. So this, again, could be through team building activities, debates, collaborative inquiry, where each group is working on discovering a topic together, peer teaching, where they're teaching one another, or different classrooms or grade groups, or even creating their own quizzes or sharing their thoughts with others. So this is something that I do in my own programs, where when creating the curriculum. So for instance, the topic here is, why is Ayatul Kursi so powerful? So I know that this topic is going to take me 4 weeks to complete. I've identified the meaningful work they're going to be working on, in this example, it's that they're going to be developing a strategy that would help other Muslims develop the habit of saying Ayatul Kursi after each fard or before they go to sleep and things like that. And then I've also identified what provocation, the objectives for each of these weeks, as well as how the students are going to collaborate. So this is an example of how you can apply that in the school or at home. This could be through weekly family halaqas, or where you plan for the provocations and scientific experiments that you do, doing volunteering or engaging with the masjid, and tying daily actions with the faith. So whether you're setting a table and you talk about, mentioning the importance of, remembering Allah when you're setting the table, or, appreciating all the different ingredients that are included on the table from Allah's creation. These are all ways that you can create, tie in all these strategies within your home, as well as creating a faith-rich environment. So play different games with the children. Like, it could be, a trivia game about certain topics. It could be where you're always reading Quran, whether you're in the kitchen, cleaning, playing. The Quran is being recited, whether you're in even in a car, during a car ride. Just really creating this faith-rich environment in your home where children are being surrounded by our deen. So I also wanted to share with you guys some resources. These are all clickable. So once the slides are shared with you, you can click on these resources and find them. Some of these are Arabic resources, and some of them are also in English that you can also benefit from, some of which you probably are already aware of. This right here is the teacher resources that Nectar Education specifically provides for teachers, that you might find some additional things in there, including books and other websites that might be useful. I'd like to, before I go into the questions, I'd like to leave by giving you guys some homework to do. This is if you guys haven't heard of The Thinking Muslim, I would highly recommend that you guys subscribe to their channel. They're very useful. But there's this last video that you can scan here to watch. But the most important part to me that I thought I'd love to share with you guys starts actually at the very end of the video, at the 2-hour and 13-minute mark. So I'd really like you guys to really read or listen to what Sami Hamdi here presents, reflect on the message that he shares, and really think about what we've said in this presentation, along with what he said, what he's shared, and share with either a colleague or a partner at home, or even if you'd like to share it on different social media platforms and tagging ISAC or Nectar Education or any of our partners, and really reflecting on how, what is our role as educators in leading this ummah, and really, setting that minbar goal that we talked about earlier on in this webinar, thinking about how we can really set this ummah and our generation for strong, a strong spiritual development that would lead themselves and others to greatness, inshallah. So with that, I would like to thank you all for joining me. And I know there are 5 minutes left, inshallah. So if anybody has any questions, or I think some of our, the moderators also had some things that they needed to add as well.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Sister Fadwa, for this insightful presentation. It's really amazing. And I think we all need this support and this guidance for this upcoming month of Ramadan, inshallah. And I'm sure all of us as educators at different Islamic schools, we will benefit this, and we can pass on the message to our teachers and educators that work with us. Jazakumullah khair for your hard work, and definitely everybody can benefit. So we can have some time to answer some questions if anybody would like to ask any questions, please. Yes, please.
Hello, assalamualaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I wanted to ask about, how do you help guide kids Islamically and spiritually if they're like resistant or maybe not interested? Like, for example, they don't want to pray, or they're really they're making wudu at the last second, not really keeping up with the class, and like not wanting to do it with enthusiasm, but you don't want to discipline them, because then it creates a negative association. So like, what do you do in that instance?
Yeah. So I'll give you an example. Again, our answers are always the hadith and Quran. So I'll give you an example of a situation with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where they were in the masjid and there was a Sahabi who was known to always be drunk and drinking. And every time he would be present, he would be in this intoxicated manner. And so the people around him were mentioned, were basically telling him, like, why are you always coming? Like, why aren't you able to control yourself? You're around us and you need to be able to stop your drinking habits. Just look at how you look. And this other Sahabi basically called upon Allah's curse on this drunken Sahabi, and said, "May Allah curse you for always being in this drunken state." So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whenever he heard the first comments that the Sahaba were saying towards this individual, he didn't really say anything. But once they said that, Allah's curse is on you, that's when the Prophet got angry and said, "How dare!" Like, I don't want to say the exact. I'm like paraphrasing here, but how dare you bring Allah's name on your brother? Now, I'm not saying this is what you're saying, what's being done, but the idea behind this hadith shows that sometimes we are always expecting that people, that our children are going to be like robots, right? I set this perfect environment, we're teaching them about prayer, and they're going to pray immediately and they're going to do it perfectly. We have to understand that there will be resistance, there will be difficulties, and sort of constantly reminding them. And that's why we even see in the Quran, even the prophets were reminding their sons of, La tushrik billah, and always, don't forget your prayers. So this is something that we also have to keep in mind, is that there's always going to be this constant struggle of reminding them. But you're correct in making sure, as the Prophet had done in this situation, is that we can't make that child feel that they are less, or that they are not as good as some other Muslim peers that are following through with their prayers. But what we can do as educators is really focusing on, okay, I know this child is struggling with his prayers and with wudu. Okay, what units can I create, or what lessons can I create that would really help him feel the importance of this prayer? Maybe I need to go back and really focus on that connection with Allah before I focus on of him performing the salah correctly. That doesn't mean that I'm gonna not remind him to pray. I will gently remind him about the prayer and wudu. But then I'm also going to be focusing on this other aspect that I think is weak, which is his connection to Allah, understanding, why do we even need to pray? Why is Allah even asking us to pray to him? And really focusing on these topics while you're simultaneously just reminding him about the importance of prayer and really building that habit of self-discipline. Because Muslims, we're not weak. We're not people that wait to be motivated. We are disciplined individuals, and that discipline comes through prayer and through fasting and through all those other things. And so you can build that identity, that strong identity through sharing this information, but also sharing those experiences of connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the examples that I gave previously. But I'm also happy to connect with you guys further if you guys need help with information on really connecting them with Allah. I hope that answers your question. Let me know if there's anything else that you need to know about that.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much.
Yaki.
Yes, please, Faiz.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Jazakumullah khair for the webinar. I really liked it, and I strongly agree with all the points, especially the points that people in Islamic school, they should develop strong connection with the kids and even the parents, so that the kids, they get gravitated towards Islam. My little brother, he also used to go to an Islamic school, And what I noticed there was that the people in Islamic school are so overworked that they don't get the time to develop those connections with the kids so that they have spiritual development, the kids. So what I did was I created an app called School Events, especially for Islamic schools, so that their time gets optimized through automation, so that they
Okay.
get more time to dedicate to the kids. You can check it out on its YouTube. If you search School Event, SCHOOLIVEN.
Oh,
Jazakumullah khair.
School Living. Okay, Jazakallah khairan. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to ask any questions? Yes, Faiz, please.
I had asked a question in the Q&A box, and I was just wondering if you guys were gonna respond to.
I can't see the. Are you able to see it, Iman, Sister Iman?
Yes. How do we make time to slow down for all this mindful reflection and just engage our thinking power? I feel like life is so busy and rushing.
Yeah. So the idea is that this is so a lot of what I've presented could be used in a classroom setting, right? Where the teacher has the time to plan her lessons and identify like what picture she wants to present or what video or what experiment she wants to do, or even if at home that's something that you have the time to do. But a lot of the examples can also just be done on the fly, right? So even if the example of the research where just that having that open communication, and this is something that even the Prophet had done that we see through his seerah and through his hadith, where they would just sit in a circle and then just talk about, well, what do you think this ayah means, or what do you think it means when we say who among you is the richest? What do you think that really means? And really just engaging in that conversation. So a lot of this spirituality support doesn't always have to be something that you sit and you plan and you have to like prepare something in advance. It could be through our daily interactions with our children or with our students. And it could be, again, like whenever I remember like we were once during this is something so cliche, but like just an example of how it's not something that should feel overwhelming. Even for instance, during fall, and you see all the different colors. That could be you could be in the car, or you could just be at home from your window, and you say, imagine if all the trees were just purple, or imagine if all the trees were just red. Instead, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose for each of the trees to have a different color at a different phase, at a different time, so that when we look outside, mashallah, the sky or the landscape just looks amazing, mashallah. Or even the sky, like I said, sky, but that's also an example of sometimes when you're out for a drive and you just see the sky, subhanallah, look how Allah, like, would you, if you had to create something, would you be able to think of something like that with all these different colors? Whenever you color your sheets, you just color the sky blue, but when I look at the sky, it looks all like all these different colors. So it's really just sort of invoking Allah's remembrance through your everyday life. It's not something that really has to be planned to the extent that that I've presented today. That's in the case of, if that time is available, and when teachers do want to set that time, or even as homeschooling parents or just working parents, have the time to set that. But it's understandable that we are in a fast-paced world, and children are involved in activities that might be taking time. But even with these regular activities, we could try to find ways that we can remind them of their deen and of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If they're going to taekwondo practice or soccer practice, we can say, remind them of the hadith, and المؤمن القوي خير وأحب إلى الله من المؤمن الضعيف. The strong mu'min is more beloved to Allah than the weak Muslim, and that's why we're going to soccer practice or taekwondo, to really strengthen our bodies and be strong Muslims. So it's really thinking about just how we can invoke these everyday, activities and mesh it with our deen.
Thank you, Dr. Fadwa. There is one more question about someone is asking, is there a best practice approach in dealing with students that are rude or they overly joke around when the topic is about spiritual growth or Islamic topics? I think this is, most of teenagers, they might not take it seriously.
Yeah, so I think this could be actually answered in more than one way. The first part of it could be that students sometimes feel that they don't have a say in what's being taught. And so the teacher is really just trying to give them the information, and they're just sitting there and responding. And so that's why, especially in the teenage years, you see that sort of like, I don't really care attitude, or let me just make a joke out of it attitude, because we're not really allowing those opportunities for them to actually contribute and do things. Whenever we think about examples from the Sahaba of them leading armies at, from 14 or 17 years old, it's crazy that, the adults at that time really created an environment where the students felt like they had, or those children or those Sahaba really had the confidence to lead the army. So it's thinking about, what message are we sending our teenagers? Are we sending them that, no, you're sitting in class and you have to listen and this is what you need to do? Or are we sending them a message that, hey, by the way, I'm depending on you and you're going to be the leader of tomorrow, and what are you offering? What are you offering? And making it serious about the reason that you're learning this is because you're going to be leading. And thinking about what is, and really setting, from those examples that I gave of the meaningful work, whether they're going to provide real life solutions. Let's go help the masjid come up with a plan, so that the children are not like running all over the place. Let's create a children's program for the masjid. So that's what you guys are going to be working on. So as you're preparing a children's a program for the masjid, you need to learn about the 6 pillars of Iman, for instance, and create a children's program for the children of the masjid about this topic. So they're learning about the topic by doing something that's benefiting the society, and you're also putting them in these leadership positions. So part of it is just them just feeling like they want to be in control, and so we give them that control and leadership. Another part of it could be that really students sometimes need to learn just respectful, interactions with the teacher, and that's something I think ISAC has presented perhaps in the past. Correct me if I'm wrong, or may do in the future. Something's related to classroom management or children with ADHD, and understanding how to deal with students in those situations. But from my perspective, or from my expertise, it's more of, okay, what kind of environment, engaging environment, meaningful environment can I create in my classroom where they're not having to do that?
Thank you so much, Dr. Fadwa. And I think that concludes our webinar for the night. I would like to say a final thank you for your insightful presentation. And on behalf of ISAC, I would like to say thank you for Brother Asad for providing us with this insightful webinar. And thank you for our partners today from Nectar Education, Sound Vision Canada, and Ruh Care. Thank you for our attendee who joined us today and participated in the discussion. Please stay connected, and may everybody have, inshallah, blessed Ramadan, and Jazakumullah khair. Have a wonderful evening.
Jazakumullah khairan. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.